Today we're talking about fleeing and eluding a police officer. Basically a car chase, right? And this is a fun topic. It's something that people all over the country tune in to watch on TV, these high-speed car chases. Occasionally we do have those cases and they are interesting, but most of the time it's not like that. Most of the time it is far less interesting. It is simply some confusion, or maybe the person just didn't pull over quick enough. And the officer gets upset and the officer doesn't like it and he charges them with fleeing and eluding. So if you've been charged with this, we want to talk about the law and we want to talk about how you can handle it. You're also going to learn that if you haven't been charged with it, well, obviously what you should do when you're pulled over and how to avoid getting this charge in the first place. So let's dive into this law right now. Hi, I'm attorney Derek Martin with Driver Defense Team in Chicago. We're talking about fleeing and eluding, so let's go right into what the law says. The law first says that the operator of a motor vehicle has to stop, right? And then when do they have to stop? Well, they have to stop first when there is a visual or audible signal. So we'll pause right there and let's talk about what a visual or an audible signal is, because the law defines it. The law says that that signal may be by hand, voice, siren, or red and blue lights. Those are all pretty self-explanatory. We've seen them all in one shape or another. I've seen ones where the officer kind of gets up next to him and directs the person to pull over. Voice, maybe if the officer is outside of the vehicle standing at the intersection or in the street, or maybe the officer's got his window down even and just yells over. Red and blue lights, pretty obvious as well. Sirens, we all know what police sirens are. So any of those will count. And the one where people get tripped up are those, hand or voice ones, right? You say, did this officer really intend for me to pull over? Well, unfortunately, that does count. And if you fail to comply with that, you could be charged with this. In addition to that visual and audible signal, the officer has to be in uniform. The law specifically says that officer has to be in a police uniform and in a police vehicle. So where that comes into question is a plainclothes officer or an officer who's in an unmarked vehicle. You can imagine these situations where it's not as obvious that this is a police officer. That might be a defense, but the prosecution would have to establish that the officers had those markings and that you should have known that it was an officer. So if those two elements are present, the visual and audible signal, as well as the marked police officer, and that driver refuses to comply, well, they can be charged with this. So the different ways that you can fail to comply are obviously don't pull over, you just keep going. Also, if you increase your speed, that is a basis for this charge. If you extinguish your lights, in other words, turn off your lights, obviously that is seen as an attempt to flee or elude, obviously at night. And so that is another thing that's not permitted. And then just generally, if you otherwise attempt to flee, maybe a sharp maneuver or elude, you don't have to actually get away, you can get caught, but even just attempting to flee or perform any of those actions in your vehicle can get you charged with this. Typically, fleeing and eluding is charged as a misdemeanor. It is a criminal offense. It is always a criminal offense. A misdemeanor is a Class A, and it's going to get you up to 1 year in jail and $2,500 in fines. And on top of that, it can suspend your license. If this is your first time and you've been convicted with fleeing and eluding, your license is going to get suspended for 6 months. If it's your second time, your license gets suspended for 12 months. However, there are some scenarios that can be present that can cause this to be upgraded to a felony. That's called aggravated fleeing and eluding. And I will tell you, a felony is not what you want. A felony is far more serious than even that misdemeanor criminal charge. So the ways that this can be upgraded to a felony are: 1, if you travel at a rate of speed at least 21 miles an hour over the speed limit. So if you go more than 20 over while trying to get away, then this can be a felony. Next is if you cause great bodily injury to anybody. Obviously, this means a crash. If you were, or even just hitting a pedestrian or a bicyclist or, God forbid, an officer. If any of that were to occur, you're almost certainly looking at this being upgraded from a misdemeanor to a felony. If you cause damage in excess of $300 to any property, This could be striking another vehicle, hitting a road sign, anything like that. I mean, pretty much any property is going to be over $300 these days. So if you strike something or break something while trying to flee and elude, again, you're almost certainly looking at a felony offense for this. The fourth way is if you disobey 2 or more traffic signals or traffic control devices. Examples of that would be running through 2 or more red lights or stop signs, going down a wrong way, anything like that. Those traffic violations, if you commit 2 or more of those while trying to get away, again, another reason to be a felony. And finally, if you are concealing or altering the registration of the vehicle, in other words, changing the plates or hiding the plates or something like that in order to get away, that's also a felony. So there are some things that it's not that hard, really. I mean, 20 miles over the speed limit, not that crazy. Police officers can find 2 traffic violations, again, pretty easily. So if you do decide to, or, get charged with fleeing and eluding, a felony is not that far off. It's rather easy. That felony is going to be a class 4 felony if it's the first time. If you are convicted of that, that can have some very serious consequences. Besides just being a felony, it can have time in prison and up to $25,000 in fines. It will also revoke your driver's license. Now, previously we talked about a suspension. A suspension is for that 6 months or 12-month period of time, and then at the end of it, you get your license back. A revocation is different. When your license is revoked, it means it's gone. It is not coming back unless you successfully petition the Secretary of State to give you your license back. And that's not an easy thing to do, especially when you have a history of running from the police. If this is the second time that you've been charged with this or more, then you're likely to be charged with a class 3 felony. That's a more serious type of felony. Can have a longer time in prison is possible with that. And again, it's also going to revoke your driver's license. So you can quickly see how a charge like this can get upgraded and become a very serious situation pretty quickly. Like I talked about at the beginning, it's not always a high-speed chase. If it is, then you're certainly looking at a felony of some sort here. But even just the misdemeanors, I often see situations where the person didn't realize they were even being pulled over and continued for a little while. Or they were fearful. I just spoke with a lady not too long ago who initially got stopped in a forest preserve area. It was dark out, it was the middle of the night, there's nobody around. She was uncomfortable stopping there, so she continued a ways to an area that was more lit up, a gas station that was kind of on the other end of that forest preserve. And she was charged with fleeing and eluding. And so you can see how it's not always this crazy scenario where you're running on the highway from the cops. It's rather easy, especially if you're not aware of what's happening or aware of the surroundings. It's rather easy to get charged with something like this. It needs to be taken seriously. It is always a criminal offense. And there often are defenses to this. On the felony side, it can be argued that you didn't commit those violations, those ones that caused it to be upgraded, or things like that. There can be a number of defenses of this, including the ones we just spoke about. Being unaware that you were even being pulled over or being pulled over by a police officer. Because remember, the law says that you have to willfully choose to flee. And if you're not aware of it, then that was not a willful act. So there are some very real defenses here, and it's very smart to talk to a lawyer about this. We will hear what happened. We will provide you a free strategy session where we will talk about all the possible defenses, the goals for you, and how best we can handle your case. So if you're interested in that, let us know. Otherwise, I hope this video was helpful and gave you some good quality information on fleeing and eluding a police officer in Illinois. Thanks.